If people understand this, and they understand this stratified identity, and they understand what God is, namely their own highest level of identity, they won't punish themselves. Basically, you're cutting your line of communication with God. Then God can no longer see you, no longer wants to see you, and can no longer accept you into himself, because he's totally consistent. He can tolerate it for a while, but then after a while, he's got to exclude it. All right, so this is what hell is. Basically, your own highest level of identity is telling you you can no longer exist because you're no longer in touch with me. You've cut your own identity in half. You've severed it.
Christopher Langan, often called the smartest man alive and known for his 200 IQ, has spent decades developing a radical new model of reality, the Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe, or CTMU. He proposes that reality is not just a collection of objects and forces, but a self-processing, self-referential system, a kind of universal language that describes and contains itself. In this framework, identity is not a single layer, but a hierarchy, from the physical through the mental to the highest level, which Langan identifies as God. God in CTMU is not a distant ruler, but the ultimate, all-encompassing level of identity, a logical and existential structure shared by all conscious beings.
See, God, in the CTMU, there's something called the stratified identity. And God can be defined as the highest level of the stratified identity, the level that we all share with each other. We're all united in God. But God is good, and he must exclude evil in order to preserve the integrity of his identity.
But what happens if someone rejects this highest connection? According to Langan, to deny God is to sever the deepest line of communication within yourself. The soul, in this model, is the sum of these levels of identity. When the highest level is cut off, the self loses coherence. The result is not fire and brimstone, but a collapse of meaning, a self-imposed exile where the highest reality can no longer see or accept you.
So if you deny God and you cut basically, you're cutting your line of communication with God because you hate him so badly, then God can no longer see you, no longer wants to see you, and can no longer accept you into himself because he's totally consistent.
Hell, then, is not an external punishment, but a logical outcome of rejecting the structure that holds reality and yourself together. In this view, the boundaries between good and evil, existence and oblivion, are not arbitrary. They are written into the logic of the universe itself. The next segment will reveal why, in this model, even imperfection and suffering are woven into the fabric of reality, and what it truly means to be excluded from the highest level of being. The Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe, or CTMU, is Chris Langan's answer to the question, what is reality at its deepest level? Unlike most scientific theories, which treat the universe as just a collection of physical objects and forces, the CTMU views reality as a single, unified system, a kind of language that describes and processes itself. At its core, the CTMU says reality is fundamentally logical and self-referential. This means the universe is not just a stage where things happen, but an active participant, a system that can talk about itself, define itself, and even change itself from within. Langan calls this a self-configuring, self-processing language, SCSPL. In this view, everything that exists, matter, energy, space, time, and even consciousness, is part of this universal language. Reality is not just a set of things, but a living, logical structure that is aware of itself and able to evolve. This approach is very different from how most people think about the world. In the CTMU, every part of reality is linked together, not just by physical laws, but by a deeper logical structure. This structure allows the universe to be consistent, self-aware, and able to adapt. It's like a giant mind, constantly processing information and ensuring its own coherence. The CTMU also suggests that reality is not random or meaningless. Instead, it is organized by rules that come from logic itself. This means that everything in the universe, including our own minds and identities, is connected at a fundamental level. According to Langan, understanding this structure is the key to understanding not only the universe, but also ourselves. This foundational idea sets the stage for everything else in the CTMU. If reality is a self-processing language, then identity, consciousness, and even concepts like God or the soul must be understood as parts of this larger logical system. The CTMU offers a new way of thinking about existence where logic, language, and reality are deeply and inseparably connected. In the CTMU, identity isn't a single, simple thing. Instead, it's made up of layers. physical, mental, and spiritual, that together form what we call the self. Chris Langan describes this as a stratified identity. Each person's identity starts with the physical body, includes the mind and consciousness, and reaches its highest point at the spiritual level. This highest level, in the CTMU, is the connection to God, or the ultimate source of meaning and coherence. The soul, in this model, isn't something separate from us or mysterious. It's the sum of these layers, the complete structure of who we are. When all the levels are connected and in harmony, a person experiences a sense of unity, purpose, and meaning. The spiritual level acts as the anchor holding the rest of the identity together. If this anchor is lost, the lower levels lose their coherence and the self can start to fragment or unravel.
So these levels of stratified identity are. They're your soul, and once you interdict that, once you sever it, you're cut off from God. That way your own highest level of identity cannot communicate with you anymore. It can't see you.
This idea explains why, in the CTMU, the worst thing that can happen to someone is not physical pain, but the loss of connection to their highest level of identity. When that connection is cut, the person's sense of self breaks down. They lose their sense of meaning and direction, becoming isolated not just from God, but from the deepest part of themselves.
Basically, your own highest level of identity is telling you you can no longer exist because you're no longer in touch with me. You've cut your own identity in half. You've severed it. It's called the soul, the human soul.
In the CTMU, God is not imagined as a distant ruler or a supernatural force outside the universe. Instead, God is defined as the highest level of identity, the ultimate reference point that unites all conscious beings and all layers of reality. This view is radically different from traditional religious images of God. Here, God is the logical and existential source of meaning, coherence, and order. He's not separate from reality, but is the very structure that makes reality possible. Chris Langan explains that every person's identity is built in layers, from the physical to the mental and finally to the spiritual. The spiritual level is what connects us all to God. God, in this sense, is the meta-self, the universal self that is the source and boundary of all identities. In the CTMU, God is both the origin and the limit of reality, distributed everywhere.
See, God, in the CTMU, there's something called the stratified identity. And God can be defined as the highest level of the stratified identity, the level that we all share with each other. We're all united in God. But God is good, and he must exclude evil in order to preserve the integrity of his identity. This is what he does. So if you deny God and you cut you're cutting your line of communication with God because you hate him so badly, then God can no longer see you, no longer wants to see you, and can no longer accept you into himself because he's totally consistent. God is totally, completely self-consistent and will not tolerate his denial. It's just not something that God can afford to tolerate, because something that is perfect cannot absorb or assimilate imperfection into himself. He can tolerate it for a while, but then after a while, he's got to exclude it.
This idea has deep implications for spirituality and theology. In the CTMU, to be united with God means to be aligned with the highest level of your own identity and with the logical structure of reality itself. God isn't something you can be separated from physically, but you can lose your connection to this ultimate level through denial or rejection. Maintaining this connection is essential for meaning, coherence, and ultimately for existence itself.
God is his own boundary. God is his own boundary. He's his own origin and his own boundary. And both of those things are distributed. This is part of the logical structure of the CTMU. Okay, both of those things are distributed everywhere because God is self-composed. It consists of himself everywhere. He is unbounded. Therefore, reality itself is unbounded in every part.
Good and evil are not just personal opinions or social rules. They are logical realities built into the structure of existence itself. Goodness means aligning yourself with the logical order and coherence of reality. Evil, by contrast, is the willful rejection or denial of this order. It is the act of cutting yourself off from the highest level of identity, which the CTMU defines as God. Chris Langan explains that God, as the ultimate level of identity, is perfectly self-consistent. This means that God cannot tolerate anything that fundamentally denies or contradicts his own nature. For reality to remain coherent, it cannot absorb or assimilate what is completely opposite to it. In other words, true evil is not about making mistakes or being imperfect, It is about willfully rejecting reality and the source of all meaning. For God to remain perfect and consistent, he must exclude what is fundamentally opposed to him. This is not about punishment in the traditional sense, but about maintaining the logical integrity of existence.
God is totally, completely self-consistent and will not tolerate his denial. It's just not something that God can afford to tolerate, because something that is perfect cannot tolerate, cannot absorb or assimilate imperfection into himself. He can tolerate it for a while, but then after a while, he's got to exclude it.
This distinction is crucial. Ordinary human imperfection does not separate us from God. Life is full of challenges and nobody can be perfect all the time. The world is designed in such a way that we are constantly faced with difficulties and temptations. God does not condemn us for struggling or making mistakes. What truly separates someone from God is the total denial of reality, the refusal to accept the highest level of identity.
The world throws too much at you for you to be perfect. Hey, nobody can be perfect in this world. To live in the physical world is to be assaulted by imperfection all the time. God doesn't hate us for that. That isn't what makes a person evil. What makes a person evil is total denial and negation of ultimate reality and his own highest level of identity, which is God. It's wanting to undo, to unbind reality, to say the name of reality backwards. That's what evil is. And that's what you get punished for. And that's unfortunately what a lot of these new atheists are doing.
In the CTMU, exclusion is not a matter of divine anger or vengeance. Instead, it is a logical necessity. Evil, then, is not just bad behavior or moral failing. It is the attempt to unbind reality itself, to negate the source of meaning and coherence. The person who rejects their highest identity effectively removes themselves from the system that gives life, meaning and connection. This view reframes the traditional ideas of sin and punishment. It suggests that the ultimate consequence of evil is not external torment, but self-exclusion from the logical structure of existence. In this way, good and evil are not arbitrary categories, but essential features of a reality that must protect its own consistency. Understanding this logic helps explain why, in the CTMU, the fate of every individual is tied to their relationship with the highest level of identity. The next segment will explore how this framework leads to a unique vision of hell, not as a place of fire, but as a process of existential unbinding. Chris says hell is not a place of fire or endless torture, nor is it a punishment handed down by an external judge. Instead, hell is a logical and existential process that unfolds when someone severs their connection to their own highest level of identity, what the CTMU defines as God. This is not about divine anger or revenge, but about the natural consequences of rejecting the very structure that gives meaning and coherence to existence. When a person turns away from their highest identity, they effectively cut the line that connects them to the source of all order, unity and meaning. In the CTMU, the soul is the complete structure of identity, layered from the physical and mental up to the spiritual. The spiritual level is the anchor that holds the self together. If this anchor is lost, the lower levels lose their coherence and the self begins to unravel. The unraveling is not a dramatic event, but a gradual fading, a process in which the person becomes more and more disconnected from meaning, purpose, and ultimately from reality itself.
Hell is simply the process of ceasing to exist, of being telecally unbound and having your identity destroyed, because it is unacceptable to God. So if you deny God and you're cutting your line of communication with God because you hate him so badly, then God can no longer see you, no longer wants to see you, and can no longer accept you into himself because he's totally consistent. Basically, your own highest level of identity is telling you you can no longer exist because you're no longer in touch with me. You've cut your own identity in half. You've severed it. It's called the soul, the human soul. Once you sever it, okay, you're cut off from God. That way, your own highest level of identity cannot communicate with you anymore. It can't see you. So when you die and you beg on the deathbed, please take me back in, God can't hear you anymore.
Hell, then, is not a place but a state of being unbound. It is the slow dissolution of identity, the experience of being locked out of the system that sustains existence. The CTMU describes this as a kind of existential exile. The self becomes invisible and inaudible to the highest reality, unable to reconnect or be recognized. This is not something that happens to ordinary people who struggle or make mistakes. According to Langan, everyone is imperfect and the world is full of challenges that make perfection impossible. What leads to hell is not imperfection but the willful, total denial of one's own highest identity, the conscious rejection of the source of all coherence.
There's this phrase, I don't know where I got it from, but it says that hell is a prison locked from the inside. So you bring with it your own ideas of what hell is?
That's correct. Where else would they come from?
For someone like Dawkins, who doesn't believe in the concept of hell either, would he then experience nothingness?
He will create his own kind of hell, and that is probably going to be a hell where nobody pays any attention to it. And then finally, in the end, he'll just be melted down to nothingness.
The experience of hell is shaped by one's own beliefs and expectations. If someone imagines hell as a place of fire, they may experience it that way. If they expect nothingness, they may dissolve into oblivion. The key point is that hell is a prison locked from the inside. It is the inevitable outcome of separating oneself from the logical structure that makes reality, and the self, possible. Within the CTMU, free will is not just an illusion or a byproduct of complex systems. It is a real, emergent property that arises from the logical structure of reality itself. Because reality is a self-configuring, self-processing language, every conscious agent within it has the capacity to make choices that affect their own identity and their relationship to the highest level of reality, which is God. This means that the freedom to align with or separate from the source of meaning is built into the very fabric of existence. However, the CTMU also acknowledges that restoring the connection to one's highest self of identity, once it has been severed, is not a simple matter. If someone has truly cut themselves off from God, returning is not just a matter of changing one's mind or uttering a few words. The process of restoration requires a deep, sustained transformation. It is about genuinely re-establishing the line of communication with the ultimate source of coherence, not merely performing outward actions or seeking approval from others.
Well, yes, basically. The problem, however, is that once you've professed atheism, now you've got to get God's attention again. Okay? Once you've severed your soul, once you've put a cut in your soul and you've actually cut God off, now you've got to heal that severance before God can see you again. It takes a long time. It's not going to have, oh, well, I've changed my mind. I've decided not to hate God anymore. That's not good enough. Okay, it needs to go on for a long, long time, and you've really got to try and you've got to cry like a babe in the woods until God finally hears you. Okay, so it's not easy. These people are hurting themselves by cutting themselves off like that.
The CTMU draws a sharp distinction between external actions and true acceptance of one's highest identity. Simply acting in a way that appears good or moral is not sufficient if it is only for the sake of social approval or personal gain. What matters is the authentic acceptance and integration of the highest level of identity, the genuine willingness to be in harmony with the logical structure of reality. This is why, in the CTMU, free will is both the gift and the challenge. It allows for real choice, but also places the responsibility for restoration squarely on the individual.
Unfortunately, your relationship with God cannot be feigned. When somebody is doing good acts, it could be only because they want to be recognized by others as someone who does good acts. They want the moral approval of other human beings. That's not good enough. Okay, there actually has to be the acceptance of your own highest level of identity.
The ideal of human perfection, as described in the CTMU framework, is not about being flawless or simply following external rules. Instead, it is about achieving authentic reunification with the ultimate source of identity. This ideal is a state of total coherence across all layers of the self, physical, mental, and spiritual, culminating in harmony with the supreme level of reality which is identified as God. Within this context, Jesus is presented as the supreme model of human perfection. His significance does not come from myth or unattainable status, but from his willingness to fully experience the human condition, endure suffering, and remain true to the highest level of identity even in the face of death. Jesus is not just an example of kindness or morality, he is the embodiment of total self-sacrifice and the renunciation of ego for the sake of unity with the source of perfection. This model is not exclusive to Christianity. Other spiritual figures such as Buddha also represent attempts to approach the same ideal, although their paths and emphases may differ. Achieving this kind of perfection is not easy, nor is it guaranteed by mere religious affiliation or outward actions. It requires profound transformation and sincere acceptance of one's identity at every level, especially the supreme one. Only through this inner integration can the connection to the source be restored, making the soul coherent and visible to ultimate reality.
Jesus is the ideal of human perfection, someone who is willing to lay down everything and sacrifice himself for mankind. All right, that's what Jesus is. He is the image of human perfection. It is through a Jesus-shaped gateway that we can approach God. All right, we have to become perfect in order to unify with the perfection of God. So that's the way Jesus functions in the Christian religion, and the way he can function in every religion.
The path to unity does not mean denying one's humanity or imperfections, but rather embracing and transcending them through acceptance of the highest identity. Every person has the opportunity to walk this path, regardless of religious or cultural background. What matters is the process of inner integration, not external conformity. Perfection, in this perspective, is not a static state, but a continuous process of reunification with the source, overcoming separation and restoring coherence to the soul.
He lived like a normal man, like an ordinary human being, absorbing the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune at every turn, which is what we have to do. That's what we're expected to do. Therefore, Jesus is an exemplar for us. But if we want the ideal of human perfection, that's Jesus.
Ultimately, the human ideal is not just an abstract aspiration, but an invitation to real transformation, a journey back to unity with the source of existence and the overcoming of any form of alienation or inner exile.